The season 5 of the Humans and AI podcast is here. We're going to be chatting with incredible founders and leaders across the neocloud, AI infrastructure and platform space with a sharper focus on today. We're going to be learning about their businesses, the roles they're in, the challenges they face, what's actually working and what's not. This is current, unfiltered insight from the people building AI. I really can't wait for you to hear it. So Nick, thank you very much for joining today. You and I have been talking now for a number of years, so it's great to finally get you on the couch and have a chat. For those that don't know you, obviously you've been within the hyperscale cloud space now for a number of years, working with the likes of Microsoft, Amazon, and obviously now at Era as the CTO. It'd be great just for you to do a bit more of an intro, talk about obviously Era 4, really who they are, what they do, and then we'll go into it if that's all right.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks, Nick. And great to meet you in person finally after all this time. It's been behind a screen and behind a camera. So now we're behind different cameras, which is a different experience. But it's Era 4 it's kind of funny. Working as an Australian, I live in the US in Seattle, and then I work for a UK, AI company. Is kind of funny when we're talking about sovereignty and UK enterprises. It's kind of a bit of a conundrum, but I guess similarly in the Commonwealth. So I guess there's some goodness there. But like you said, yeah, Amazon and Microsoft. I moved over to the States in 2016. I was working for Amazon in 2014, so I've been there ever since. So 10 years now, next month. And spent some time at Microsoft. Both of those companies, my role there was deploying and operating network capacity for both Azure, or AWS and Azure, and looking at supply chain and process engineering and things of that nature. So pretty interesting time at Microsoft through COVID when the scale needs there were extraordinary, and responding to that was quite a task. Since then, I was CIO at Firmus, or Sustainable Metal Cloud, and how they're going to market, which is down in Australia. They're doing immersion cooling at the time, and they're off to some big announcements down there in the South Pacific recently. And since then, I worked for a couple of different startups. Did some advisory work with CoreWeave, some diligence on that project in 23. Grok, G-R-O-Q. I always have to, define that because I think it's Elon, it's Jonathan Ross. So the founder of the TPUs at Google created a company, Custom Silicon, was acquired by NVIDIA last year or over the Christmas period. So I worked with them last year. And found myself, working with Era 4 under a different name sort of mid last year. And it's been a great little journey. Company's growing quickly, and we've got a really big opportunity ahead of us to tackle and provide a lot of value to UK enterprise, UK government, but equally some of the larger sites we've got under development, which we'll get into. But we've got the opportunity to really land some large customers doing some big workloads here in the UK.
Fantastic. So Era 4, so obviously was called Carbon 3. Now Era 4 is a new name change earlier on in the year.
Yes.
Obviously there are quite a few neoclouds out there now, or AI infrastructure plays. What is it you guys are doing differently or trying to set yourselves apart?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think I was watching a podcast with Dylan Patel from SemiAnalysis, and referencing 200 plus neoclouds. So
it's about that now, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a bustling market, and differentiating is key to survival. If everyone just did the same thing, so the value that kind of Era 4 and to your point previously Carbon 3 brings to the table is it's built on sort of the land and power IP of the the company that it's built on top of. So if I take a step back to prior to June last year, before the company was even created, the co-founders there were basically producing power through landfill. So the holding company underneath or on top of, whichever way you want to think about it, was producing power with landfill. So that biogas, that methane offtake, goes into turbines and essentially was selling that power back to the grid. Yep. So it was been doing that for 15 or so years now, quite stable. I was surprised at how stable that connection and that utility has been. And so I guess because of that, landfill is close to metros, it's far away from metros as well. So you have a lot of land IP, 50 odd sites across the UK. You have the opportunity to both, utilize that land, which is again close for low latency AI, and far enough away for it to be, in larger scale, to produce AI data centers at those locations. So utilizing that power, utilizing that land, means you do behind the meter, production of power, and because you have the land, you can build quickly. So we've taken that to effect in a couple of our data center builds to date, standing up, very quick, data center capacity, and landing modular data centers. So essentially going from some PO to serving tokens in 90 days. And so that speed allows us, that IP that we're building on top of gives us a speed advantage. So where our advantage compared to other neoclouds and renting out capacity and getting cages and things at colos and at retail or even wholesale prices, our power, producing our own power, gives us a blended price far lower than the competitors, sub 10p per kilowatt hour. And the land gives us the ability to build these things quickly, such that, we can target an architecture and have it, land on that architecture versus by the time the, 4 walls and a roof get stood up, the architecture's changed and you're dealing with double the densities or, triple the power utilization and you've got challenges on the physical infra that doesn't match the software needs or the customer needs that you have on the other side. So the demand is so high and, the capacity is so low, whether it be in hyperscalers or other neoclouds that we're competing with, we can utilize that to our advantage.
That's huge. Obviously that kind of price point, as we said offline, that's you competing with the likes of the Nordics and Texas, as opposed to obviously what you'd argue is your peers here in the UK. Obviously that speed to building building data centers. I'm assuming they're modular data centers that you're building.
Partially, some of them are, and some of them are not.
So combination.
Yes.
So, how important is it though to have the right partners to get that off the ground quickly then?
Well, 100%. Again, to go fast, you can't do all this stuff yourself. You have to work out who you trust, how you trust them, and what you trust them with. And so, we've been, thankful for some of the partnerships that have gotten us to this point, to stand up a lot of that compute. So, the modular data center partners, the compute partners of the infrastructure that goes in, networking partners of how we interconnect this stuff, both inside that data center and outside. So, the industry the typical industry is not used to going this quick. And so, it's funny because our kind of owner has kind of laughed at, been frustrated by the fact of it's never been as hard to spend money than it is in this industry because, you come with a check and you go through a PO process and you go through approvals and you go through bid pricing and you go through all these different things, and it could be, instead of it being days, it's weeks or it's months. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. And so we have to compress those timelines, and we work with partners that have been able to, and we seek out those other partners as well that allow us to meet the needs of those customers. And going fast is obviously safe, but fast is something we require. It's not nice to have anymore. It's required to meet the needs of the business. And I can give you multiple examples of where we've had to, make a decision that's kind of 80% or even 90, and then move on rather than do a full-blown, RFQ, RFP, a diligent process across, a number of players or options or solutions to end up at the same solution anyway. So the speed is really both the advantage that we have, but it's also it makes us do things that the industry is not used to.
I think speed of delivery is one of the things that we often see with other organisations that they struggle with. It's ultimately the tricky thing. You guys already having the land, you're having the power already, puts you at a distinct advantage. looking at the industry now and where things are going, as we mentioned, I thought it was going to go down. I thought we weren't going to see so many new players coming in. I'm speaking to several new ones now. Do you see yourself obviously competing with a lot of these, or are you going after something different? Because I think last year and certainly the last 12 months, it was, everyone going after the same customers, so, Microsoft as an example and OpenAI and what have you. Are you going after a different set? Obviously you talked about public sector. Is it enterprise that you're sort of targeting? How do you see yourself sort of going after on the commercial side of things?
Yeah, look, it's actually a blend. And because, if you only focused on one, you're beholden to, if you think about it as a sort of a pyramid of folks utilizing AI, at the very top, like you mentioned, you got the hyperscalers needing, just massive amounts of compute. And all they really want is you to off balance sheet, their compute needs, and you're at the mercy of their very long list of requirements. And so nothing wrong with that, but there's only a handful of companies looking to do that. And then a handful of those companies outside the US in different geos. So like Microsoft is a good example, and there's only a couple more. And a few AI labs sort of sprinkled through that. And so, that's at the top. In the middle, you've got what I refer to it as the modest middle. Mm-hmm. And so you've got the enterprises. And so the sophistication of some of those enterprises is quite high, but for the most part, it's quite on the low side. And so, they're not necessarily ready to pick up bare metal as a service compute and utilize it in a meaningful way. They're used to paying an AWS or a GCP or an Azure and getting that plethora of other software suites around it. And are they happy with paying those high bills? Probably not. And that's where we can offer them a solution to sort of, take some of that storage, the compute, and those AI workloads off them. But again, it's a varying factor of, how much, when do they need it, how sophisticated are they, and some of those enterprises have compliance requirements that, mm-hmm. We're a young company, we're building some of those compliance requirements, and accreditations as we go.
Yep.
So that's a bit of a journey for us. It's unreasonable to think we'd have that ready in 6 months, but in another 6 months we'll be, when I come back, it'll have a different story. But, it's the hyperscalers we're definitely chatting to, the enterprises we're chatting to here in the UK, and obviously the government as well. So, I just literally had a conversation this morning about how we, how we facilitate an offtake for some of those government workloads, such that we can vend them usable compute that they need to de-risk their investments across, those American hyperscalers, where you've got Cloud Acts, Chip Acts, Patriot Acts, all the acts, that can impede their ability to, have sovereign AI and have, compute and data here residing in the UK. And some of those organizations, whether they be those fringe agencies in the government, UK enterprises, data repatriation is a real thing. And, the hyperscalers are losing customers, and data is exiting and egressing out of their networks into infrastructures like what we're building and others like us, because customers the price is high, they can't get the capacity they need where they are, and we're offering a real solution with capacity that meets their needs, and sovereign requirements that some of them are requiring, some of them are nice to have, but increasingly I see that as more of a requirement over time.
And you guys obviously are doing a lot. Now you come out of stealth, obviously stealth for a little bit of time last year. You've made some strategic appointments within the business, Sana being one of them. And obviously she's very involved in public sector and constantly at events. And I'm always seeing her speaking and obviously you're posting, so your branding is really strong. How important is that branding to give confidence in the marketplace? Because obviously you are sort of the new kids on the block. So, and it's competing with the likes of, or maybe not even competing with the likes of CoreWeave, but obviously differentiating yourself.
Yeah, no, look, I love Sana. She's a great asset to the business, and she does a great job on the government side. And I selfishly would like her across the other parts of the business too, because she can sprinkle goodness throughout. So thrilled to have her on the team. And what I think actually one of the things we could be better at. We did a lot of some press releases early on in our former title for Carbon 3, but subsequently since the name change, we've been doing a lot of stuff behind the curtain, with the business in the rebrand. And so, I think what you'll see this year and in the back half of this year, or even in the next few months, we've got some announcements to sort of talk about, which I can't necessarily talk about now, but will be public soon, is some of our deployments that we're working on and the timelines to those. So, we can sort of be talking more actively about those, the customers that will be utilizing that compute that we're bringing live, and, the future capacity we're bringing to bear. So, I think we could definitely do a better job of talking about that stuff. But I think what we've sort of seen in the industry is a lot of people talking big numbers and big projects and big capacity. And so, what I think the reality of some of that has been, maybe not as fleshed out, perhaps is the right word. But what we're trying to do is being, maybe far more modest and under promising and over delivering side of things. So, what we say we're doing, is probably under what we're actually doing, where maybe the industry is maybe on the other side. So that may change in the future, because maybe that's not a path to this is the success of other companies has utilized some of that hyperbole, and perhaps we've been a bit modest with ours. So we definitely have more to talk about than what we've said out loud and in the public. And so I think we'll see the juices of that squeeze in 26.
Yeah, hype is definitely what some of the bigger names are doing, and whether it be investment, whether it would be talk about the number of gigawatts that they got on their roadmap. And again, obviously with you guys, I think you released sort of GP300s I think at the beginning of the year, working with HPE, with the equipment that you've got and the services you've got. It's obviously bare metal services, and I appreciate you can't talk about all the deployments that you're doing, but what is the overall plan? Is it bare metal? How far up the stack are you actually going?
Yeah, great question. So we brought some H200s live last year. Mm-hmm. So that's been well received, and they're essentially spoken for and sold for. We're bringing additional B300s to life in late Q2, early Q3, and then another tranche behind that. So several thousand B300s. So that will go into one of our sites. Like I mentioned before, it's a 5 megawatt facility that we're bringing live. And then beyond that smaller site, we've got several other larger sites and one big site in Wales that will be more of a 27 timeframe. But, the good thing about what we've got, because we've really got optionality with this stuff. And what's interesting, the 3 different customers I sort of talked about before, sort of the hyperscale, the enterprise, and the government, is we have the option to splice this up how we see fit, and we can target, like I said, we can target an architecture of 27, which is likely Vera Rubin at this point, or some kind of Rubin derivative. But splicing that up such that we can fortify something for the UK government, we can provide anywhere on the stack for these enterprises, and we can provide these bare metal services and or just powered core and shell for these hyperscalers to roll their racks into and support all 3. And that's really interesting from our business point of view, which other companies are sort of focusing on 1 or maybe 2 of those. We can actually do all 3. And so you asked where about on that software stack. We are, we've partnered with Rafe to go to market with them. So essentially that allows us to do whatever we want up and down that stack and offer each of those services to those enterprises, whether it be bare metal or it be managed Kubernetes or it's anywhere up the software stack, we can offer a solution for them, and that just gives us a competitive advantage to sort of move quickly with that solution, automate around it where we need, and look to bolster that software offering over time as those customers need. And I think I guess the tension there, for lack of a better term, is we've seen some of our competitors and other neoclouds in the past sort of go down a path of creating these large software stacks and end up selling bare metal as a service. If you look at CoreWeave as an example, a lot of their compute, a lot of their revenue comes from offtake of bare metal. You know, they've got a large software team and a large software stack, and it's fantastic. I've used it, you know, and others do, and get great value out of it. And there's a reason why they're at the top of the pecking order. But as a percentage of their revenue, it's quite low compared to the revenue it derives versus, you know, literally just offering, you know, bare metal as a service. So, you know, that will change over time. But at the moment, it's heavily weighted on the bare metal side of things. Most neoclouds would attest to that.
Yep, I can definitely sort of agree with that, having spoken to lots of different customers, and Rafe being another client of ours as well. So,
oh, good, yeah.
They're a good bunch of guys.
Yes.
So in terms, obviously, the opportunities are out there. They're obviously huge. We know there's, you know, challenges around capacity. You know, there's an awful lot of demand. In terms of, obviously, the risks, though, you know, you guys are doing something a little bit different. You know, you're not talking about, you know, Series A, Series B, loads of investment, obviously self-funded for the time being.
Yeah.
Appreciate that may well change in the future. How are you doing things to cope with that kind of growth in the industry? Because you're not going cowboy, you know, so to speak. You're not actually making really brash sort of statements. How are you guys actually keeping up with it, though?
Yeah, so there's a limit to some of the things that we've done, and the ability for us to not have, you know, large debt and large equity play. So to answer your question, we've hired a fantastic person by the name of Chester Reed as our CFO. Yep. Previously of Yonder lineage, and has done a bunch of work, you know, with that business, and you know, huge success. And his job is to, you know, bridge the gap of where we are today to where we want to be in the future. Not to say that we have unique advantages of where we are today. Don't get me wrong. We're very fortunate and very lucky to be in the position we are. But that's not necessarily a long-term, you know, in the industry we're in, that's kind of time bound, and capital bound. So, you know, going and raising, you know, in the capital markets is on his roadmap and essential for what we need to do going forward. We're talking about like hundreds of megawatts of capacity. You know, we're talking billions of dollars. It's not, you can't just write checks for that stuff anymore. And so, you know, we are in a different league by virtue of that. So the risk there is, you know, I guess to answer your question, there's a lot of risks. One of them is finance and capital, and getting access to that in a way that's meaningful and allows us to grow. There's a hell of a lot more other risk that we're kind of in the near term, even just supply chain. You know, we can talk about that, but it's, you know, we've got hiring challenges, we've got supply chain challenges, capital challenges. Like, this is not an easy thing to go do. No. You know, there's landmines everywhere you walk. And you know, it's a fantastic, you know, business to be in, and it's fun and great people. But to say it's easy or void of risk is kind of, you know, you've been in, you know, working in this space for a long time too. So
you have to have a strong stomach.
You've seen every version of what looks good and what looks sketchy. And
we've seen the good, and we've seen the ones that have failed, and it is tricky. And you touched on the leadership team, and I think you guys have got it interesting, because obviously your leadership team started with mostly sort of that utilities and that sort of power expertise, and then obviously they moved into this space, and they brought in some people that have come from neoclouds and the infrastructure, and you just mentioned, you know, CFO from Yonder. So that balance of the power side, and then the actual hyperscaler, as your experience, you know, people that have come from data center. How key is it to get leaders that have come from all different sides of the business to come under a sort of one sort of senior leadership team?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, you know, I think every business that grows quickly goes through this transformation, and so it's kind of weird to go through a transformation when you're building it from scratch. Like, to transform something, usually you have to, you know, pick it to pieces and rebuild it, but you're kind of building it as you're going. But I think for folks that we've brought on, and you know, again, I was one of, you know, Mark Dorber and Joe and others, you know, co-founders of the business that were on the energy side and infrastructure on that side. sort of, early days. I came in September of last year, and subsequently, Tom Humphries, our CEO, was brought on sort of in Q4 of last year. And so, as each of those, and Tom's made some, great hires and brings a lot of, skill and knowledge and industry, experience with him. And I guess each of the people we've brought in, whether it be Chester or Sana, Mihal, myself, like we have this network of folks that we kind of bring in and can accelerate quickly, but there's a limit to how quickly that you can scale and leverage those relationships. But I think what unites us is, one thing I was sort of talking about with our recruitment team is that we've managed to like hire no dickheads. So
It's a
like
good
you may
rule to
want to block that out, but like we've managed to just have a no jerks policy.
Yeah.
And so every single person in this business and every person you would speak to, you've worked around who these people, are. They're these brilliant jerks, and they command, they have a lot of respect and they make a lot of decisions, but no one likes to work. And so I think, we know what bad looks like. Again, I said that before, but when you know what bad looks like and you know what good looks like, you can rinse out some of that stuff when you're building, as opposed to inheriting, larger teams that, have some of those folks perhaps embedded and that have been there a while. We've been able to hire some very malleable people, and I mean that in the sense that they wear a lot of hats and they can caretake roles in a 80% fashion, across a plethora of responsibility, as we hire the right people to take those hats and then go, continue that run. So, I think smart people doing a lot of things tend to know a lot of other smart people doing, capable of doing a lot. And we've been fortunate, but that, I think it takes effort. We need recruitment partnerships such as yourself and others to help us find, keep and kind of grow those people. And the growing side and the keeping is you don't just leave it. Culture isn't built from you do this and I've written it on a page and we all do these things together. It's crafted and it's shaped and it's kind of influenced, but any one person saying it's this is a recipe for disaster, because you have people that don't like this and don't want to, so I think it's the people you bring in need to have that malleability, the respect and knowledge and skill they bring in allows them to, bring in others to the teams. We have a great mission, we've got a great foundation as well. And so, working in a startup and coming in it can be daunting, for people that have, for folks that have been working for an employer for so long and having a set of jobs and titles and functions and things. But the opportunity with startup is that you can kind of do things a little differently, but it's a bit chaotic at times. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think we sort of allow for people to sort of, utilize their skill set and give them rope. And we're all building this together, so we're all kind of rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, I mean it's going through change, isn't it? And I think startups, particularly doing the kind of projects that you're working on, you need special type of people, and whether that is bringing in really good senior leaders that can bring in talent because they've worked with great people before, having a good internal talent team as well. Yes, hopefully partners like us tend to play a part, and it's building that culture, isn't it? And if you can get it right and have this no dickhead policy, It makes a huge difference, because it just takes one person who doesn't have that can-do attitude, who looks for the problems rather than the solutions, that can really completely hold up everything that you're working towards.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, it's I guess maintaining those relationships across. Like if my team doesn't have a good relationship with sales is going to be out there trying to sell something and say we can do this, we can do that. If they don't know what we actually can do, they're going to fail. If they know what we actually do and we don't deliver it, we're all going to fail anyway. So it really is, horizontal work streams. If you're building silos and vertically kind of, and we've all you work at large companies. This happens all the time. Like people build their little, they do land grabs and these large kind of internal businesses that put them in the middle of it, and they can't be fired because they know where the bodies are buried and all this kind of noise. We can avoid a lot of that, and if you can work out how to work with others and build that trust, those relationships are as important as the stuff you're building. It's kind of funny. We're building all this AI, and both internally, we're working on how we scale and leverage it internally, just like a good AI company would.
Yep.
That was showing others that we can do that internally as well as what they can do, but. It's people and relationships that are the meat and potatoes behind the business, and if those don't exist and you can't trust the person next to you, you just gonna you may fail. You won't fail immediately, but you'll fail eventually. Something will suck in your future, and so again, the no jerks policy allows us to trust thy neighbor and work together, and you just get better outcomes.
Fantastic. So, in short, people should be looking out for the Era 4 website, looking on LinkedIn. If they're interested in looking for a job,
we are hiring.
You'll be hiring, and you will be hiring this year, whether it be across commercial, technology, data center. That is something obviously you're going to be doing here in the UK. We also mentioned, obviously, just in terms of your growth, I think you've got about 5 sites that you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean,
obviously possibility of a lot more than that as well.
That's right. Yeah. So to go back to your first point, there's 15 odd job specs on our career site now, and more to follow. We just I met with our HR, well not HR, our recruitment head, and we've got another wave coming, and apologies that will end, that will have a reverberation effect to you, but that's on the hiring side. For the sites that we're developing, we're actively talking about 3 to 5 of them, but the group that we build this infrastructure on, we've got 40 plus sites that we can develop, and so the good problem we have is the customer demand, and the conversations we're having allows us to sort of be picky and choosy about where and when we develop some of those sites. Like, where does it make sense from a latency point of view, from a timeline point of view, what kind of capacity do we have? Some of these larger sites are hundreds of megawatts. There's a pipeline to a gig plus of capacity, and so that in mind, and you talk about those 3 different sectors. If we only focused on one, if we only focused on hyperscale and we only focused on government, would that fill the need of that one customer? And we think we can splice it up in a way that adds value to the UK enterprises, that adds value to the UK government. Sorely needs AI compute capacity, and bringing back and like the data repatriation, but also AI repatriation. You bring your data back, but you still need to do something with it. So we provide I think a great solution for those use cases, and so we can kind of spot them around the UK such that we de-risk from a customer point of view. We reduce latency. Internally, that allows us to vend those tokens, whether it's a low value token and we do it eventually in a scheduled way, or it's a high value token and we do it, lowest latency, highest performance, newest architecture, biggest model. And we can, rise and fall on that spectrum to provide a pretty unique and unique offering to the folks, looking for millions and billions of tokens.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it on. I think, it's amazing what you guys have done, in what is a relatively short space of time. About a year, I think, since the business started.
Actually, yeah, June of last year. So
I think I met Joe and Mark, I think, at one of our Humans and AI events back at Data Center World last year.
Sure.
And that's when we all sort of heard about it. So, it's amazing what you've done in a year. It's amazing what you could think to do in the next 12 months. So we'll probably have to get you back and just talk about it then as well. But it's
Absolutely.
been fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Good to have you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
And that's it for this week's episode of Humans in AI. A huge thanks to my guests for sharing their insights. and to you for tuning in. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit follow, share it with someone in your network, and let me know what you think. There's plenty more coming this season as we dive deeper into the people, the companies, and the ideas shaping AI right now. See you next time.